Welcome viewers to another edition of the GeoInterview. Today we have with us Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. Sir has served as India's ambassador to Lithuania and Poland and also as India's High Commissioner to Canada and Pakistan. Currently, he is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation and a corporate strategic advisor. Further, he has authored a bestseller titled Anger Management, the Troubled Diplomatic Relationship Between India and Pakistan, which looks into more than 7 decades of relationship between both countries from the perspective of the serving diplomat. It's a great honor to have you here today with us, sir. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here, Digvijay, and great to be talking to a young audience. Thank you.
Now, sir, first and foremost, let's start with the title of your book itself, Anger Management. Why did you choose to name this book Anger Management?
Well, it is a name that suggested itself in the course of the writing of the book. Because when I examined the relationship between India and Pakistan, I found that the motif and metaphor of anger was very relevant. There was a lot of anger in the relationship historically because of various factors and incidents. For instance, the original partition created so much death and destruction. 1 million people were killed, 15 million people were displaced during that process. After that, there was a lot of anger about real or imagined on the part of Pakistan about loss of territory, the feeling that they deserve to have Kashmir, and then later Bangladesh was lost in 1971, which was East Pakistan. So there was a lot of anger about incidents, and there's been anger about terrorism. India has, each time terrorists strike in India, there is a great deal of anger. And of course, there have been 4 wars that the countries have fought. So anger is a continuing motif in the relationship, but so is management when we talk of policy. So when we talk of our relations with each other, one of the tropes or one of the comments you will hear is that, this is so complex and so tough a rivalry to resolve that you can't resolve it. You can't solve this problem. You can only manage it. So, anger, both anger and management were important sort of metaphors, and I just combine the two together to get anger management. And if there is some advocacy in the book, it is perhaps that we should manage tough relationships, keeping in mind, not driven by passion and short-term anger, but by long-term interests, by long-term views, and that would help us better understand and navigate a relationship and manage anger in it. So therefore, anger management.
Right. So now that is a very intricate explanation of the metaphor that you have used in the book. And it's actually true that two nations, which maybe they are not empires, imperialist forces, so they don't have one person at the helm of it who is taking all the shots, right? We have a system, we have a different set of people governing different things in the governments, in the two governments. So it's very imperative to manage that anger. We cannot actually be driven by one incident. We cannot be driven by short-term goals of our own, right? So I think that's a very good point that you made. And the metaphor is surely going to seep down to the minds of the people who are going to listen to this. Now, so when did you decide that you are going to write a book on the India-Pakistan relationship, specifically focusing on the perspectives of the diplomats? Because that's something we don't hear more from both the sides in South Asia.
Well, it is, I was not a Pakistan specialist in the Indian Foreign Service. I was more of a Europe hand working and staying in Europe and working on Russian issues and European issues. So the Pakistan posting itself, when I was posted as Indian High Commissioner there, came as a bit of a surprise to me. So I had in mind when I was there to read up a little more about the relationship, to understand how it was driven and understand its peculiarities. But the moment that I decided to write about it was after I was expelled from Pakistan. So, my posting came to an end abruptly in August 2019, when India decided to abrogate Article 370, change the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. That's the point that Pakistan asked me to leave. And I think that is the point where I felt that perhaps I should write about not just my experiences, but read up and write about the evolution of this relationship from 1947, because it's such a peculiar, stranger than fiction story of such a peculiar relationship that it's worth telling the story again and again.
Right. So now that's actually very true that Pakistan was actually very triggered by the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A on Kashmir. And as you said that you got hands-on experience on of this anger between the two nations, right? And that is how we got this book. Now, sir, in your book, you have highlighted how many diplomats and leaders in India and Pakistan repeatedly tried to bring peace between both nations, right? Although all such attempts failed either due to lack of civil-military fusion in the India policy of Pakistan or due to Pakistan's use of cross-border terrorism as a state policy. How do you see their vision, whether it was S.K. Lamba or Tariq Aziz, in bringing peace between both these nations?
Yes, so what you referred to was what is popularly referred to as the back channel conversation that India and Pakistan had in the 2000s, particularly initially between Musharraf, the Pakistani dictator, on one side, and on the Indian side, it was initially in the time of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. So I think these were important efforts. And through the 75 years of this relationship, there has been a good deal of diplomacy that has taken place, whether it is overt or behind the scenes and covert. So I think the fact that we have frequently talked to each other is a positive. That, despite the wars, there have been efforts at diplomacy, at understanding each other. And that's the reason why India and Pakistan understand each other very closely. And even though they have very, very different ways of looking at their relationship. And I think the efforts you refer to, the efforts for peace, were important efforts, and they can be revived because, there are ideas which have now been, some of them frozen, put in the back burner, or frozen, whichever metaphor you like. But at a future point of time, these are some ideas that can be revived, apart from newer ideas that could be taken forward in managing this relationship. And I don't subscribe to the view that this hostility is built into the DNA of both countries, or of Pakistan. In India, there's a point of view that, there's a good deal of hostility that is in Pakistan's DNA, and therefore that will never change, and therefore there's no point in a conversation, but, because that hostility won't go away. So I think it is important, despite this high level of hostility, to look for ways and means for some kind of calibrated engagement in order to understand each other better, and from India's point of view, to understand the abnormality of Pakistan, the complexity of Pakistan, in order to deal with it. So I would say all efforts at peace don't go to waste. Sometimes they're behind their times, sometimes they're ahead of their times, but we should constantly look at newer ways of dealing with a complex relationship.
Surely, sir, as you said that we should look at newer ways to resolve our differences. But I think one of the prerequisites for getting the relations back on track is that both the sides uphold their side of the bargain, right? If they agree to something, they should implement it on ground. Now, sir, whenever a diplomat goes to some country as a, like, of course, as a diplomat, there are some immunities that they get under the Vienna Conventions. Since you have served as a diplomat in Pakistan and India's diplomat in Pakistan, uh, how did you feel? Like, was there an element of threat during your tenure, especially when the Balakot airstrike happened in February of 2019?
Well, fortunately, there isn't a direct threat to diplomats serving in Pakistan, during these periods of tough times in the relationship, because I think both countries have come to realize that uh, diplomats need to be protected and shouldn't be attacked because they have a certain role to play, and they are both in both countries serving their countries. But having said that, the problem in the India-Pakistan relationship is that diplomatic immunity is often not respected. So there have been attacks on diplomats very frequently, physical attacks as well. And there has been, in some cases, some junior diplomats and not the high commissioners have been roughed up in the streets or been harassed. And I think this is something that the two countries talk to each other constantly about. And I would say that the personal threat to lives of diplomats is much less now in Pakistan. The two countries know and respect immunity of diplomats, but this is often breached, and that is something we need to guard against.
Surely, sir. I think, well, as I said, that one of the prerequisites is that both sides uphold their side of the bargain, and Vienna Conventions is something you don't go against. Now, sir, how do you see the future of India-Pakistan relations, not simply as a diplomat, but as someone, as a normal person, as a civilian, be it economically, be it people-to-people relations? How do you see the future of the two nations, apart from the government-to-government channels?
Well, normally in diplomacy, we say that there are three broad aspects of relations between any two states. There is the government to government, the people to people, and business to business. What happens in the case of such extreme hostility and countries that go to war against each other is that the hostility at the political level infects all other areas and affects all other areas. So therefore, the business to business and people to people relations also tend to collapse. And this is what happened in India and Pakistan, that because of this famous subcontinental rivalry and the huge differences between the governments, the narratives, particularly in Pakistan, have poisoned the public atmosphere. So there's a lot of hostility also at the level of the people. But having said that, we should recognize that while relations and going back and forth in terms of visas is very limited, trade is down to zero, trade and investments are virtually non-existent. But still, at the level of the people, there are pockets of goodwill. There are pockets of understanding that we are neighbors, we have lived together, we have a common past, and perhaps the future is something where we ought to work towards getting together. The problem in Pakistan is that since it's virtually a country captured by the army and not a real democracy, this feeling doesn't get translated to the level of leadership. And therefore, the hostility that the Pakistan army manufactures towards India is something that becomes the order of the day. So I think that is the fundamental problem. But you ask about the future. The future can be different from the past. There is no kind of norm written in humankind or human history that you continue doing in the future, or repeating the errors of the past. So certainly, I think there are ways forward, and I think the primary kind of way in which this abnormal relationship can become normal is if Pakistan decides to become a normal country. And what I mean by becoming a normal country is that it is not in the future a country that is completely in the grip of an army which sees benefit in hostility towards India, and it sees India as a forever enemy, but is run by normal civilians who are able to make that distinction and come up with a way of dealing with a neighbor. And also, if there is a change in the behavior of that army, it stops sending terrorists across to its neighbors and stops cross-border terrorism. So the future can be different from the past if Pakistan does what it is saying. It has realized that the importance of geoeconomics over geopolitics, and the importance of not having a permanent hostility with the neighbor, but of trying to gain from that neighbor through trade and other means.
Absolutely, sir. I think the narrative against India, which seeps down in a top-down, bottom approach from the Pakistan army, needs to go away, and the government, the democratically elected government, needs to take charge. Only then can the relations move forward in a more smoother way, which will benefit the entire subcontinent, not just the two nations. Now, sir, moving on from Pakistan to Canada, how was your experience while serving there?
Well, Canada, I think is a beautiful country. I was moved from Pakistan to Canada, and there is much that is positive in Canada. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And also, I think the fact that we have a huge Indian diaspora is something that is both a blessing for the relationship and often an irritant in the relationship, because when some sections of that diaspora make a lot of noise and try to disrupt the normal relations between India and Canada. But I would say that the Canadian relationship, the India-Canada relationship, has a lot more positives than negatives.
Surely, sir, now the next question is actually about that diaspora and the problems it is creating between the two nations only. Now, the current relationship, as we know, between India and Canada is uncordial due to the support of extremists, right, which Canada shows due to its, of course, the political compulsions, I guess. Now, do you see a return to normalcy between India and Canada in the near future? Like, are there any prerequisites that needs to be fulfilled, or like they can come back to square one once again?
I think there's a lot of potential in the relationship, a lot of basic, positives in the relationship, which will take the relationship to a positive territory. So yes, I think the relationship will improve. And, the irritant of Khalistani terrorism and extremism has been with the relationship, not in recent times, but for many decades, for more than 4 decades, since the 1980s. In 1985, the airliner Kanishka was downed by Khalistani extremists. So I think this is something that is not new. The fact is that what we need is ways of managing and containing that. So it is important for Canada not to give space to extremists, to terrorists who may indulge in such behavior, or cause violent behavior across the shores in India. And but it's also important to remember that while media highlights this as a major problem, what we are hearing is a noise from a microscopic minority of extremists who have found shelter in Canada. So of the about 2 million diaspora, the percentage of the people who are involved is less than 1%. And these extremists are some 10 or 12,000 people at the most, who might be operating through different extremist gurdwaras, and they tend to capture the political space disproportionately and make their voice heard, and make the politicians echo their voices. So I think if they are given less importance and less space by Canada, it will be something that the relationship can certainly change, particularly because there is so much positive going on in the India-Canada relationship, because Canada is an important Western democracy. It sees eye to eye in India in geopolitical alignment about the ways of the world. We see a common strategic challenge from China. The Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy speaks of China as a disruptive power, India as a critical partner. We have a strong economic relationship of more than $100 billion going on with trade, services, and huge Canadian investments in India. And we also have a diasporic connection, which is very strong with, as I said, 2 million diaspora plus another million Indians, people of Indian origin or NRIs living and working in Canada. So I think this is a relationship which has all the elements for improving. It needs to be managed in a better way, and particularly in terms of this irritant that has a disproportionate effect on this relationship.
Surely, sir, like as you mentioned that these minuscule groups of extremists make the politicians echo their own agendas, we can only expect that this does not become the state policy of Canada anytime soon. And I don't think that it will become, because India, like the state to state relations are more stronger and more important for any nation than all these political agendas or different ideologies. Now, sir, on a lighter note, can we expect another book on India-Canada relations, perhaps titled Irritation Management?
Yes. So in fact, some people have suggested that I should simply have the same name, Anger Management too, and talk about India and Canada. But I think this is something which is worth talking about, writing about, but I have no plans at this point of time in writing about this relationship, but who knows what will happen in the future.
Well, sir, we'll be the first one to maybe get our hands on that copy if the second part comes in. Now, a final question from our side. Most of our audience and our members are young people. Many of them want to serve their country and want to pursue a career in the field of international relations, either by joining the foreign service or by joining various think tanks and other, like the think tankism industry. What advice would you give to them and for the youth of this country in general?
I think that's a great question. I really enjoy talking to young people. I've been going about promoting my book in various universities and, think tank circuit, talking to young people. And I feel they are really, truly global citizens now. And that is the first reality that we need to understand, that from the time, for instance, our generation was growing up to the time in the 2000s, this century, all in young people who are plugged in to the modern world, they are global citizens. So they are very global. The world of geopolitics matters. The world of geoeconomics matters. And no matter what career you choose as a young person today, the world will affect you. The geopolitics of the world will affect you. The wars going on in the world will affect you, whether you are simply doing a business or, the inflation will affect you of a distant war. The prices of food and fertilizers will affect you. Or if you're a global citizen traveling for education or for work, the global mobility is affected by things. So what happens in the world affects us. And I think the business of understanding geopolitics, understanding the world is a fascinating business because the world is in so much flux. It's changing. So I would say a career in diplomacy in the Foreign Service would be very enriching, rewarding, a life well lived, and hugely enjoyable. I would strongly recommend it. But also the options of studying and dealing with international relations, either in think tanks or academia. I think India will be more and more sort of globally connected country. India has been a huge beneficiary of globalization. Half the Indian economy of $4 trillion is external facing through trade and investments. So I think young people should take a great deal of interest in the world, and those who choose this as their profession to study the world, the study geopolitics, and to deal with it, I think they would go in for a very, very rewarding and interesting career.
Surely, sir, that will give a good smile on our audiences. Now, sir, with that, we would like to end this interesting conversation with you here. We are actually honored to have you here today, and we are looking forward to more such conversations with you on different relations that India has with different nations. And thank you for joining us today, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much. Great to be here and great to have this chat with you.